Hello, Amy. Hello, Maria. How are you, ladies?
Hello, hi, nice to see you all.
Thank you, Maya. We're well.
Well, thank you for being my guests today on this episode of Who Cares, the series for the Wicked podcast. And thank you for reaching out and for wanting to take the time. I know, Maria, you're in a different time zone. You're in Germany right now. And Amy, you have a very busy practice. So thank you for taking the time to chat with me today because we are going to be talking about a very interesting and important topic, and it's about we're going to be touching on the human rights of female judges and lawyers in Afghanistan. And both of you have experience working in this area, and we're going to get into this subject and this conversation. But before that, I would like each one of you to introduce yourselves to the audience, please. Maria, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. So my name is Maria Alcidi. I'm an Italian barrister, but I worked for the most part of my 20 years career abroad in the international human rights field, which basically means trying to support so that national jurisdiction are in compliance with human rights standards, with the standards that have been agreed upon at the UN level and at regional level. In particular, me and Amy, we met at the OSCE, which is the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and which covered the whole Northern Hemisphere, including Canada. And this is where I did most of my work for more than 10 years, working in the field of trial monitoring, which means concretely observing the way international standards are translated and trickle down at the national level. And during the last 5 years of my career, I joined the Max Planck Foundation for International Peace and Rule of Law. And in that capacity as a research fellow, I have had the honor to support and to work with the Afghan female judges in Kabul and in other provinces in Afghanistan.
Thank you very much. Amy, what about you?
Sure. So for the past 9 years, I've been at Legal Aid Ontario, and I'm a staff lawyer there. I currently run a project providing holistic defense services to clients in downtown Toronto who manage mental health and addictions disabilities. The program provides them with criminal defense services, but as well immigration law, family law, and some other legal aid services. Prior to my time with Legal Aid, and I was working on the international scene, and I worked with Maria at the OSCE. And I spent a good amount of time, 7 years, working in the refugee field in Turkey. So a bit of a interesting trajectory to where I am now, but that's a bit about me.
Now, both of you ladies have also been working closely with female judges and lawyers in Afghanistan. So before we get into the nature of the work that you're doing, maybe you can both tell us why Afghanistan and how did you each get into the focusing maybe closely on that country?
So to me, the interest regarding the country as such was the incredible difference in terms of legal framework. I always felt that the legal framework which was applied and which is still currently applied in Afghanistan is extremely different from the one I am used to. And hence, I was very, very curious to discover this whole world from a legal perspective, which I perceived, and I only had the confirmation once working there about this difference. And this has also played into a lot of sort of revision and analysis that I've had the opportunity to make after the arrival of the Taliban on basically what went wrong from the international perspective in terms of supporting Afghanistan and why we are where we are in Afghanistan today.
All right. Thank you, Maria. And Amy, why Afghanistan?
So I did spend a good number of years working with Afghan asylum seekers in Turkey. There's a sizable community there. Part of my work in Turkey was representing those seeking asylum throughout their asylum hearings, but also resettling them to countries that would accept them, because Turkey has a rather limited perspective in terms of its obligations to refugees and providing them with permanent solutions. So one of the ways in which Afghans were being resettled was through Canada's very unique private sponsorship program. And it's a very interesting program. It allows, there's 3 prongs, but essentially it allows private citizens to get together, to pool their resources within a community, and to sponsor refugees from abroad who are in need of that support. So I had always been interested in this program because I had been on the other end of the, on the other end of the Atlantic, supporting refugees to come to Canada through that program. And I had always wanted to be involved. And very coincidentally, 4 or 5 months ago, my brother-in-law called me and said, Amy, I've been approached by, a friend of a friend. There's an Afghan woman, and she has had to flee with her family, and she's a criminal defense lawyer. And she's looking to be sponsored. And so, I really felt that this was an auspicious moment and that it was meant to be. And so I am involved in sponsoring this woman who, I will have to protect her name for safety reasons. I'll call her Mina. But I've been in touch with Mina, learned so much about her practice in Kabul, about the challenges that she and her colleagues faced and still face in exile. And we are currently working on bringing the family here in 2024. And I can explain more about the process, but, I was really so pleased to reach out to you, Maya, because I thought, what better of a community to reach out to potentially provide support to this woman who will be hopefully making the journey to Canada in 2024, maybe 2025.
Thank you, Amy. And we are very happy to hear about your work, both of you. And so maybe now this is a good point here to actually get to talk about what your work is and your experiences. So I know, Maria, you've been working more with female judges in Afghanistan. So maybe you can start by telling us a bit about that. And then Amy will go to you so you can tell us about lawyers in Afghanistan and the difficulties and challenges they are facing. And maybe you can tell us, to the extent that you can, a bit more about Mina and her situation. Maria,
Great.
if you can start.
Thanks, Maya. The work with the female judges with Max Planck followed basically 2 streams. One stream was more the typical training type of support on the broad topic of international human rights law with the focus on constitutional law. Because Afghanistan had adopted a constitution in 2003, ratified in 2004, but this constitution was operating more on a sort of umbrella level, and the judges were doing the day-to-day work, were not that sort of keen into applying the principle of the constitution in their day-to-day life. And so we felt that through the lens of international law, we could look into their own constitution so that we would be using their own tools in order for the human rights principle to be implemented and to be better understood. So this was one stream. The other stream, likewise interesting, was to support a newly born association of Afghan female judges in their strive to set an agenda for themselves, to develop policy, and to try and advocate for basically more female judges to work in Afghanistan, to try and advocate for a more conducive working environment for female judges and so on. And so I had the opportunity to work both as a trainer of these judges, but all the more important as a facilitator of this effort to build this community of sisterhood that were meant to do all this great work. And, this work was unfortunately abruptly interrupted with the arrival of the Taliban on the now 3 years ago, 15th of August, 2021.
And Maria, can you tell us a bit more specifically about the challenges that these female judges are facing in Afghanistan?
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you asked me this question, because we'll see after with Amy that there are certainly some common challenges, but there are also challenges that are very specific to the two categories. So, for example, female judges can no longer operate in Afghanistan, whereas female lawyer behind the curtain, which means without basically exposing their own work, can still work for their male counterpart. They can basically prep their male counterpart. This is no longer possible for female judges because they have been basically dismissed from their job, and there are no female judges anymore in Afghanistan. So what it means in concrete terms is that they are subject to persecution, in particular, those who have done two specifically wrong things in the eyes of the Taliban.
So I just want to, sorry to interrupt. Are they still able to study to become lawyers and judges?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Studying in Afghanistan for women is allowed until the 6th grade. So there's no women, no girls beyond the 6th grade who is allowed to study for the time being in Afghanistan. So clearly they cannot go to college, they cannot go to university, and they cannot apply, obviously, because there is no possibility for women to work as judges.
So the judges that you're helping, they have their education from outside, I'm guessing then, in that case, right?
Not at all, because the judges I am referring to are those judges who used to be judges at the moment of the Taliban arrival.
So before they were able,
exactly,
okay, so that's the change now. They were able to study to become judges, but now they no longer have that option anymore.
Correct.
Okay.
It is only ever since the arrival of the Taliban in 2021 that a number of policies have been put in practice so that women can no longer be judges, women can no longer work in a number of areas, and women, most outrageously, girls can no longer study beyond the 6th grade. This has all been the consequence of the Taliban arrival into power in 2021.
And those who were already working, they were dismissed.
They have been dismissed, and the vast majority of these 220, because this was the number of the female judges in Afghanistan, the vast majority of these 220 judges have been so far exfiltrated from the country, because as I was hinting at, they used to face, and the few who are still in the country, they face huge risk of persecution because they have tried and convicted Taliban, who are now free, and they have tried and convicted criminal, for example, for domestic violence, for example, for murders of their wife, for example, for raping, etc. And all these crimes are no longer considered such by the Taliban, and hence many of those convicted people have been released from prison. And guess what? I mean, they definitely would like to take revenge and go after the female judges who had convicted them in the first place.
Right. And so what if a female judge tries to work? I mean, if she is a judge and she tries because she has the training.
Yeah,
And
they have been
so
dismissed.
what
They have been all dismissed by the Taliban authority, so that there is no job position for them. The contractual obligation have been discontinued, and yeah, on the
and
account that a woman cannot be a judge,
and
according
so
to the Taliban understanding of Islamic law.
okay. And so so what you mentioned, Maria, is that you're trying to make sure, as part of your work there in Afghanistan, is try to make sure that whatever is happening is in compliance with international law and human rights. So is there anything that is being done to rectify the situation? I mean, it's especially unfair for those who have the degree and who were working to just all of a sudden be told, well, you can't do your work anymore. Like, we don't want you, you're dismissed. So what is happening on that level or is there anything like maybe the Talibans are just not allowing any kind of change to happen? Just tell us a bit more about that.
So first of all, and just to clarify, the work I was referring to was the work I have been doing between 2019 until 2021, until the arrival of the Taliban. After that, all the work of the organization I was employed with had to be basically turned towards the diaspora mainly, and the very few remaining judges who were inside the country, right? So what can be done and what is done at the moment? I think at the moment there are two sort of pathways that are being pursued jointly. One is the political advocacy vis-a-vis the Taliban, and this is done by UN officials. This is done by a number of international diplomatic actors. And the other one, which is much more subtle and which is much less known to the wide public, is to basically support female lawyers to try and leverage on Islamic law, not the Islamic law that the Taliban subscribe to, but the Islamic law that is felt by and large by many Islamic jurists throughout the world. So the work is to support those lawyers so that they can leverage on Islamic law principle to persuade the Taliban to act in a way that is in compliance with human rights, because the underpinning conviction of many Islamic lawyer is that indeed a given interpretation of Islamic law is compatible with human rights, and this is what is being done at the moment, supporting them in all possible way, but always behind the curtain, because they are not allowed to be visible.
No.
They prepare the file for their male counterpart, for example, and it's the male counterpart who goes to trial and advocate. But Amy will definitely be more in a better position to be able to tell more about their experience.
And obviously, I'm guessing the males will not give any credit publicly to the women's work, right? Like they can't. So they're doing all this work maybe behind the scenes that could be maybe more than what the males are doing, and then they're not getting paid probably, and zero recognition.
They are paid sometimes, and sometimes but it's really
minimal,
mainstream, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the vast majority of them have just stopped working. It's only really the most committed, the most really determined of them who have decided, and also perhaps the most clever, the one that really can make a change, and with whom the male counterpart are very happy to peer, because they know that they possess a whole wealth of knowledge and expertise that they can leverage on.
Okay. And obviously, I mean, the point that you made here that is important is the distinction between the Taliban interpretation of Islamic law and Islamic law, because there are two different things. So, okay, so Amy, what about lawyers then in Afghanistan? I mean, like, there should be fewer lawyers now, I'm guessing, because if there's no hope of, especially for those who aim to become judges, I mean, there's no hope in that. And actually, well, if they can't study, like, I mean, what is going on? It seems pretty messy. So what is happening on the lawyer front?
Well, I mean, certainly, I think if I tell your viewers a little bit about Mina's story, I mean, it's her story, but it's certainly the story of other female defense lawyers in Afghanistan. She had a busy practice. She was a mom. She's a mom of 6 children, 5 girls and 1 boy. Her specialty was working with youth in detention. And we've been corresponding, and I can tell that she was passionate, cared tremendously about the work that she did. She herself was married quite young, and she has a real passion for fighting against forced marriage and early marriage. So she had her first child quite young, and did a lot of work in the Kabul Youth Detention Center, representing girls and young women who were fleeing forced marriages and early marriage. Sometimes that was petitioning the court, and sometimes that was informally negotiating with family members and community members to protect the rights of those girls. She was passionate. She loved her work, and she was a member of the Independent Bar Association of Afghanistan. And one of the things that's interesting is that their constitution enshrines gender equality and affirms the right of women lawyers to have a presence at the leadership level and in terms of decision making.
And is that still the case, or is that before the Taliban's?
So I will tell you a little bit about what happened to the association, which led to many of her, Mina's colleagues and her having to flee. But in a widely publicized incident in November 2021, the Bar Association's office was raided by the Taliban. Their database was stolen, and the Taliban went through the entire association's files and membership. When they went in, they tortured members that were at the office and beat them. A number of members were killed, and the members were threatened with death. And this led to the decision for Mina to essentially start to plan to leave. Interestingly enough, her husband worked for a period of time with a French NGO and was on the list of nationals that were supposed to be airlifted on a French flight. And I don't know if you recall, but, there was this sort of, it was in the media, there was 2 bombs at the Afghan air, it was complete chaos. People were, after the Americans pulled out, people were trying to get out. Unfortunately, because of the bombing, they couldn't get on and they were stuck. And they found another way out through a land border. And the day after the family left, the land border was closed. So like an incredibly harrowing experience. But many of the individuals who were a part of the Independent Bar Association are in exile, and they continue to advocate. They are still active. They can be found online, and they continue to have a strong membership. And when we talk about, solidarity and what we can do to support our colleagues who are under fire, sometimes it means to support them in exile as well. So I would encourage people to take a look at the Independent Bar Association of Afghanistan in exile, their website, if they're interested in their activities.
All right. So, I mean, this is obviously a very heavy topic here that maybe not a lot of our viewers are, I mean, I think people know that there are some human rights issues in Afghanistan, but maybe not to what extent and how much it's affecting colleagues who work there, whether it's judges or lawyers. But maybe someone who's listening can say, oh, that's really bad that we're hearing this, but why should I care? Like, I'm in Canada, I'm practicing, especially I'm a practicing criminal lawyer. Why should I care about what's going on in Afghanistan? So I would let you ladies answer that question. And then maybe you can also tell us, on the other hand, what can we do for people who are listening and who feel that they are being really very touched by this? Is there anything that we can do from here, and what can we do?
I can start, perhaps. To me, the answer to the question why should we care is pretty simple. Over the past 20 years, before the 2021, we have de jure and de facto made promises to them. We went to their country unsolicited, and for 20 years, we have attempted to give them hope. We have attempted to make sure that the conditions were such that women could thrive, that women could become pilots, that women could become judges, lawyers, and so on and so forth. And so to me, it is absolutely unimaginable that the moment we have decided that we no longer want to be there with our military enterprise, that we also abandon them in that endeavor, to achieve the hope and the aims that we have so long contributed to build, right? There is a very deep feeling of betrayal when you speak to women in Afghanistan. They feel like for 20 years we have cheated them. We have simply cheated. And then, when we decide that it's no longer in our political agenda and priority to be there, we simply don't care about their destiny. So to me, it's very simple. The simple fact of being a woman in Afghanistan should be as such a reason for obtaining a refugee status everywhere in the world. No question answered. In terms of risk factor, in terms of danger, no question asked. The moment a child girl cannot get an education, she should be as such recognized as asylum seeker and as a refugee. So to your second question, what we could be doing at the level of a state, we should be opening our frontiers to all those Afghan women and girls who are seeking refugees. And what can individuals do? They can do everything that is in their possibility to support all those people who are advocating for this to happen. For example, supporting the independent Afghan Bar Association in exile. For example, supporting the International Women Judges Association, who has done everything to exfiltrate the female judges. For example, supporting the refugee sponsorship program, the private sponsorship program in Canada, given that the majority of the audience of listeners are from Canada. So these are just a few of the things I feel people could be doing, and I'm keen to hear more from Hemi.
Yeah, and Amy actually is doing something. So she's a perfect example of someone who is sponsoring a fellow Afghan criminal defense lawyer. So Amy, I ask you then, why should people here care about what both of you ladies are telling us about today, and what can we do?
Well, I'm so glad that Maria talked about, our presence and the promises that we made. Canadians were certainly involved in Afghanistan. And it's always surprising, or not so surprising to me, how easily the global community and media outlets turn away from major catastrophes. We are talking about an entire generation of women who are experiencing an apartheid. And yet this is not a major issue within our media in Canada, and it's not certainly a major issue for the powers that be in terms of political discourse. You know, we also do have political obligations. We have, and legal obligations. We have obligations to Afghan women who get to Canada. And I completely agree with Maria. We should consider all Afghan women and girls de facto refugees because of the regime under which they've, lived and had to flee. And, in as much as possible, we should be prosecuting members of the Taliban regime when they are traveling for crimes against humanity and for the abuses that they have perpetrated against our colleagues and, just general women in society. Because, under the current chaperone system, it is very difficult for women to even sell their goods in a market. So they don't even have the economic clout to flee marriages, to flee the country. So, I think that there's some legal obligations. I can't say we all have different moral compasses, but I know that wicked members care about the rule of law and democracy, and we live in an increasingly interconnected global community, where unfortunately women criminal defense lawyers in Afghanistan, but also in other countries, are often doing their work at great peril and in the face of great danger. And we see it in Latin America. We see it in places like Belarus. We see it all over. And so, I know that members care about these issues. We can't afford not to care because we are increasingly interconnected in this global community. And that's, I think, the short answer that I would give, or not so short.
And how is Nina doing now?
So her and her family, I think, have a lot of hope. And maybe I can tell your listeners a little bit more about the private sponsorship program in Canada. So there are 3 categories. Private citizens can get together in a group of 5. So if you live in a community, you as a private citizen can get together with, 4 of your neighbors and petition the government and apply to sponsor. It could be a single refugee, it could be a family, but ultimately you undertake to financially support them for a year. You have to provide a settlement plan, how you're going to support them, where they're going to live, and really think about a detailed way to support them when they come. So that is one way. The government also has agreements with refugee settlement agencies called sponsorship agreement holders, and they're given a quota, so a number of refugees that they're allowed to resettle every year. And it is through the Jewish Immigrant Aid Society that I am actually sponsoring Mina and her family. They've given us over a quota, their spots to us. They were compelled by her story after we met with them. And I'm so grateful to the individuals I've met at JIAS, the Jewish Immigrant Aid Society, for their support. Because it took us a long time to find an agency that would support us. Because the reality is that in a world where there's increased forced displacement, everybody is deserving. It's very difficult to say one asylum claimant is more deserving over the other. And then finally, community agencies. So Wicked, for example, as an association, could also apply to the Canadian government, and those are called community sponsorships. So we have secured a spot for Mina and her family to come. We're hopeful that she'll be here this year or next. But, of course, they're living in exile in a state that is notorious for refouling, which means, sending refugees back to Afghanistan. And they continue to live in a precarious situation. But we're in constant contact, and the children are learning English, and we meet with them regularly. And it's my hope that they'll come here sooner than later. But having worked in the refugee field, I can say that there are so many bureaucratic hurdles that people have to go through in terms of travel documents. So I'm also mindful about being realistic about timeframes. But I do think the Canadian government should be applauded for this program, because it is a very unique program. And I think it gives an opportunity for, average Canadian citizens to reach out and make a commitment to people who really deserve and need that support. And I think it's a good program.
Now, one point that I do also wanted to ask you ladies about is, it's good for those who are able to go escape and go to another country and find a new home. That's great. But in the same time, isn't this kind of killing this breed of lawyers and judges, of female lawyers and judges in Afghanistan? I totally understand why they want to leave, because of they have no opportunities, no options. But in the same time, isn't it important to try to fight and develop and maintain, because they used to have lawyers, female lawyers and judges before. So in a way, like, if they're all leaving, then what are you fighting for if they're all going to leave the country and none of them is going to be left? So how do we achieve a balance between these two issues?
Maybe I can answer that. I was just going to say, given, speaking about Mina's situation, no, you can't practice if you're dead. So, that's a pretty blunt answer. But she also left to protect her daughters, because she feared they were coming of age, and she feared that they too would either be forcibly married or married at an early age. So, everyone has to make a decision. I've worked with human rights lawyers all over, and it's I don't know about you, Maria, but it's a constant conversation when I visit colleagues in Turkey. Should I stay or should I go? But we forget that diaspora communities do a lot to rebuild. Nobody leaves a home willingly, right? And so I think that there's such a misconception that people want to leave. When we talk about forced migration, and, in the case of Afghanistan, this is a bit of a deja vu situation, right? The Taliban is now back in power, but there were many Afghans in the diaspora community that rebuilt during that period, came back. And so, when I talk about a global interconnectedness, just because somebody leaves their place, where they're born, doesn't mean that they stop in terms of their connection and desire to make that place better.
Maria, do you have any thoughts?
Maya, I think your question is very legitimate. And to be very frank with you, I have heard this question being asked, including by the donor, right? If a donor come to you as an organization and say, look, we would really like to work with Afghan organization or with Afghan individual, how can we do that? And how can we make sure that we don't do that with the view of them leaving, right? So it's a very legitimate question. However, I feel like at the very basic moral level, it is a question that challenges my own moral standing, because I don't understand why I should have the privilege of living in a free country, free of risk, being able to speak at this podcast freely, my mind, and other people must be stuck in their country, working for their country. And that's really the condition that some donor ask. I give you a very basic example. If we organize an event in Turkey or in another country, there are very, very few countries nowadays that allow Afghan to receive a visa for attending conference or whatever, right? If we organize any of those events in those countries, the first question we are asked is, can you give us the guarantee that they will not stay and ask for asylum and not ask for refugee status? And our answer is, of course we cannot, right? I mean, would you like, as a Canadian, to have to subscribe to such a thing? Of course not. I mean, we can only trust what they tell us. And the majority of the very brave activists nowadays in Afghanistan have no intention to leave. And the strongest of them are those who hold different passports so that they can go back and forth in and out of the country at their pleas, and they can, in a much stronger way, advocate for the rights of the Afghan. But of course, we cannot offer this guarantee. And of course, I would not feel betrayed if they do attend any of those conferences and in the end they apply for getting the status as refugees. So I'm sorry if I sound too radical, but I think when we speak about human rights, we're not talking about Canadian rights or Afghan rights. We are talking about human rights. And these rights pertain to human for the simple fact of being human. And one of them is to be free from fear.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, both of you ladies, so much. This was honestly a very interesting chat, subject, and conversation. I personally learned a lot. I mean, I had a general idea about what was going on in Afghanistan, but certainly not the extent that I've learned today from both of you. And obviously it makes me sad to see that my colleagues in that country don't have the opportunities that we have here, that we take for granted. So, I mean, females do face challenges here. I'm not saying that we don't have our own challenges here in Canada, but definitely not to the extent that our colleagues in Afghanistan are facing right now. So thank you so much for raising awareness about this very interesting and important subject. And where can people find you if they want to get in touch with both of you?
Sure. Maria, do you want to go ahead first, or?
Yeah, I mean, in my case, they can certainly search for the Max Planck Foundation for International Peace and the Rule of Law. I am no longer a research fellow there, but the foundation does terrific work. And if I can only conclude, because you asked a very key question, and the most important answer I forgot, your question on what people can do. I think bottom line, we should all be listening to Afghan women, right? Mm-hmm. For example, give them visibility. Now we are, an Italian and two Canadian speaking. If we can open up and multiply the events where they themselves, Afghan women, can speak for themselves. Of course, in the case of Mina, this is clearly not possible for obvious reasons, but there are many Afghan women who are in diaspora, and they should be listened. We should be asking them what we can do with them, not for them. It's a big difference, and they should be listened to. Thank you for giving me this extra time, Maya. Go ahead.
But is there a way that they can connect with you directly, email or social media?
They can certainly find me on LinkedIn. That's the best way to connect with me. Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you. Amy.
Sure, I'll just,
on the Wicked listserv, for sure.
So for sure, you can find me on the Wicked listserv. And my email is amy.slotek@gmail.com. If I could leave two sort of last thoughts, it's that, if you're interested in finding out more about the sponsorship, if you're interested in supporting the sponsorship, even if it means just if you're in the Toronto area and want to donate furniture once we have Mina and her family here, I would be so pleased and so grateful if you reached out. And if you have any questions, if you're thinking about engaging in a sponsorship, let me know. But on a broader level, you know, as Wicked grows, and I hope that we do grow as a national organization, I hope that we can continue to have some dialogue about how we as Canadian criminal defense lawyers can reach out, can work with, not for, exactly what Maria said, our colleagues who are working in extremely perilous and precarious situations. And I just wanted to say thank you so much, Maya, for having us. And thank you to Maria for accommodating the time zone as well.
Thank you for inviting me.
I want to thank both of you because this is definitely a very important and interesting subject. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules and careers. And I really hope that we can also have another conversation in the future, maybe when Mina is here. We can also have more details about how things are going, and we can just continue this very important conversation. Thank you, both of you, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.